Close your eyes and imagine stepping into an American confectionery shop from 1850. The air is heavy with the aroma of boiling molasses, burnt sugar, and exotic spices. On the glass shelves, you wouldn't find any of the candies you know today. No Snickers, no M&Ms, not even a simple peppermint gum. Instead, there would be crystallized Gibraltars, black molasses blackjacks, sugar plums that didn't contain plums, and the mysterious hermit cookies that disappeared so completely that even historians can't agree on their original recipe. These were the lost sweets of old America, sugary treasures that nourished generations of Americans before vanishing into the mists of time, leaving only whispers in yellowed cookbooks and fragmented memories of flavors that will never return. Colonial America had a unique relationship with its sweets, especially during election periods, when election day cakes were made. Massive cakes infused with alcohol, made with yeast, whiskey, and spices like nutmeg, cloves and cinnamon, which were prepared while the votes were counted, a process that lasted for weeks. These monumental cakes could serve up to 150 people and represented more than just a simple dessert. They were symbols of civic participation and democratic celebration, a tradition that died out completely with the modernization of the electoral process. Most colonial desserts were fruit-based, although some were made from sweetened corn or other vegetables like squash. Until sugar became readily available in the latter part of the 18th century, molasses and maple syrup were the most commonly used sweeteners. Colonial recipes reflected not only the ingredients available in any particular region, but also the ethnic origins of the colonists. 2. The world of America's lost sweets began long before industrialization forever transformed the culinary landscape. In colonial times, expensive ingredients like ambergris, a substance created in the intestines of sperm whales, were used in sophisticated desserts, believed to have aphrodisiac properties, and used in both expensive perfumes and food flavorings. 3. This gastronomic extravaganza, where whale products were mixed with sugar and cream, represents a completely lost chapter of American culinary history. Among the most enigmatic desserts was apple tansy, a historic dessert dating back to the 1700s, made with apples, eggs, and a little cream, without grains or gluten, and lightly sweetened. 4. The historical version of this recipe called for rosewater, something not commonly kept in most modern homes, although it could be substituted with vanilla, completely changing the flavor profile. 4. The techniques for preserving these old sweets were revolutionary for their time. The dessert pyramid, a staple decorative element since the 17th century, could be found in one form or another on most colonial tables in the most refined homes. A careful stacking of fresh fruit, small cakes or sweets in the shape of a cone or pyramid, this table decoration was intended to be eaten. Larger fruits like apples or pears could be balanced one on top of the other, perhaps with a little sugar glaze. The custom of the dessert pyramid originated in Europe, where it was standard banquet food. 5. Native Americans had their own sweet traditions that have been completely erased or profoundly transformed. The contemporary notion of dessert, a sweet dish to conclude a meal, is a European concept thought to have emerged in the 17th century, with French origins, meaning that Native American communities before colonization likely did not experience it as we do now. This doesn't mean that indigenous peoples didn't enjoy sweets throughout the centuries. Europeans introduced cane sugar and honey to North America, but indigenous peoples historically relied on milder sweeteners like maple syrup and agave nectar. 6. One of the most fascinating native sweets that has almost completely disappeared is akutak. Taking its name from the Yupik word meaning to mix them together, akutak was once known as Eskimo ice cream, although it wasn't typically served frozen. Historically, it was made by beating fallen snow and animal fat, elk, reindeer, or whale, then mixing in wild berries, beach greens, and/or dried meats. With colonialism came Crisco and refined sugar, which worked their way into the recipes. Still, there are many cooks who make this far north delicacy using the more traditional method. 6. The Pennsylvania Dutch, who were actually Germans, brought recipes for shoe fly pie when they settled in Pennsylvania. The British colonists who settled in New England brought recipes for fruit-based fools, slumps and grunts. And the true Dutch who settled in New York brought a recipe for something called oliekoeks, oily cakes, which later evolved into our modern donuts. Africans who were brought on slave ships also made contributions from their culinary heritage, and it is to these cooks that we owe recipes like sweet potato cake and peanut pie. 2. But there were entire categories of sweets that simply disappeared. Slumps, grunts, and brambles all involved fruit covered in biscuit dough and baked under a lid to steam the biscuits and fruit. Roly-polies or duffs were made by rolling fruit in biscuit dough, wrapping it in a cloth and steaming it. Fools were made of fruit mixed with cream, often whipped cream. Betty's, one of the most popular colonial dessert recipes, involved layers of fruit seasoned with breadcrumbs. 2. Industrialization brought profound changes. The late 1700s and early 1800s were a period of rapid technological progress in the United States. The Industrial Revolution spurred urbanization, and with the significant drop in sugar prices, sweets became more accessible to the working class. This increased demand led to the transition of candy manufacturing from home kitchens to large factories, marking the birth of the American candy industry. 7. Among the oldest commercial candies still surviving, Good and Plenty, introduced in 1893 by the Quaker City Confectionery Company, located outside of Philadelphia, remains the oldest branded candy still in production. 8. But for every Good and Plenty that survived, dozens of other candies disappeared completely. The Hermit biscuit has a celebrated history on the east coast of the United States in the 19th century, with some claiming it originated in Cape Cod or even in colonial times. The election cake is thought to have first been made in colonial America. Back then, of course, there were no telephones, emails, or billboards to promote election candidates. The idea of the election cake was to encourage voters not just to vote, but to vote for particular candidates. At that time, only white, property-owning men could vote, and as the saying goes, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Women baked these rather dense and time-consuming cakes as a powerful way to be part of the political process. The recipe was first printed in Amelia Simmons's cookbook, American Cookery. 9. Apple Brown Betty, sometimes simply called Brown Betty, is a fruit-scented dessert from the same genetic pool as cobbler and apple crisp, and first appeared in the late 1800s. Typically, apples, pears, or berries are baked, and the fruit is then layered with sweet, buttery crumbs. President Reagan and his wife Nancy were fans of Apple Brown Betty when they lived in the White House. And no, Betty is not Betty Crocker. The origin of the dessert's name is still debated. 1. The techniques used to make sweets also held lost secrets. In the 1800s, molasses was frequently used as a substitute for sugar, which was expensive and harder to obtain. It played a key role in making hard candies, taffy, and sugar-coated treats. Its strong flavor provided a perfect balance to the more delicate tastes of honey or fruit, giving the sweets a depth that modern candies often lack. The use of molasses helped create a unique flavor profile that is still appreciated in some traditional sweets today. The prominence of molasses in colonial sweets also speaks to the ingenuity of the time. 10. One of the most fascinating aspects of these lost sweets was their social role. The sweets so epitomized hospitality that they were distributed throughout the menu. Dessert as such was defined in the French sense in colonial America as a small palate cleanser to be enjoyed before leaving the table. Most of the high-class entertainment of the 18th century was done with sweets, says Chef Walter Steib. It was a way of outdoing the Joneses. Today, we don't do much for these celebratory desserts that everyone eats, says Crondall. They used to make election cakes that served 150 people. 11. There were also medicinal sweets, an entire category that disappeared with modern medicine. Taffy, a chewy candy that is still loved today, has its deep roots in colonial history. During the 1800s, taffy was often made in small batches, using sugar, molasses and butter, and was typically pulled by hand to create its characteristic texture. The process of making taffy was both an art and a science, requiring a careful balance of heat and time. The preparation of colonial taffy also served as a form of entertainment. The process was often done in front of a warm fireplace, with families and friends gathering to watch and participate. 10. Ye Old Pepper Candy Company in Salem, Massachusetts, nicknamed America's oldest candy company, still uses recipes from the 1800s. Not only are the recipes the same, some of their store equipment dates back to the 1800s, which is as far back as Ye Olde Pepper Candy Company traces its roots. 12. This company represents a living link to the past, keeping alive techniques and flavors that would otherwise have disappeared completely. Among the most tragically disappeared sweets was the sugar plum. Sugar plums, often associated with holidays, were another popular treat in colonial times. Despite their name, sugar plums weren't necessarily plums, but rather nuts covered in sugar, dried fruit, or other small confections. 10. The technique for making them, which required days of patient coating with layers of sugar, died out with the last traditional confectioners. Circus peanuts have stood the test of time and may be the oldest American candy still in production. The marshmallow-like treat, with its spongy texture, orange color, and banana flavor, was created in the 1800s, a period known as the penny candy days. The most popular type of mass-produced circus peanuts since the 2010s are orange and artificially banana-flavored, often made from ingredients including sugar, corn syrup, gelatin, pectin, soy protein, food coloring, and synthetic flavors. Circus peanuts were one of several candies that were available year-round in the 1940s as a result of the widespread use of cellophane packaging in manufacturing. 13. Hermit was extremely popular in New England in the early 20th century, thanks to Fanny Farmer, who had a recipe for the spicy cookie in her cookbooks, including the uber-popular original Fanny Farmer cookbook in 1896. The unassuming hermit cookie has largely disappeared, though it occasionally emerges from seclusion. This dessert perfectly illustrates how once ubiquitous recipes can simply fade from collective memory. A drunken cake, hence tipsy. This decadent dessert is made with sponge cake, or sometimes stale pound cake, and soaked in sherry and brandy. It has roots in English trifle and went on to become a popular dessert in the South. One tipsy cake disappeared when attitudes towards alcohol changed and desserts became less elaborate. History is full of dessert graveyards. As taste preferences shift, ingredients disappear, and secret recipes die with their creators. Some beloved sweets are left behind. Sometimes a treat is simply overshadowed by a more eye-catching option. Before key lime dominated the Florida dessert scene, sour orange pie was a state favorite. Other times, the technology behind making treats disappears. The Whirler Whip, an ice cream mixer that made endless flavors during the soda fountain era, now exists only in a handful of stores and pharmacies scattered across the United States. The disappearance of these sweets wasn't sudden, but gradual. Mock apple pie isn't apple pie at all. There are no apples in it. Mock apple pie may smell like apple pie when it bakes in the oven, but it's a fruitless dessert born from times when apples were hard to come by or scarce. Most recipes today use Ritz biscuits, but the recipe is thought to date back to the mid-19th century when cooks needed to be creative without fruit to rely on for sweetness and flavor. The resulting texture and flavor are said to be exactly like apple pie, so much so that some cooks claim people couldn't tell the difference. 9. This ingenious dessert, born out of scarcity, disappeared when the real ingredients became widely available. Today, gastronomic archaeologists and food historians attempt to reconstruct these lost sweets through fragments. An incomplete recipe here, a vague description there, a nearly erased memory of an elder who still remembers the taste of something his great-grandmother used to make. It's culinary detective work, trying to resurrect ghosts of sugar and honey that once danced on American tongues, but now exist only as echoes on yellowed pages. In the dusty basement of an abandoned building in Cambridge, Massachusetts, industrial archaeologists recently discovered 19th-century brass molds, their surfaces still marked with the delicate outlines of candies that haven't been manufactured for over a century. These silent artifacts are all that remains of Confectioner's Row, the forgotten epicenter of the American candy industry that flourished between 1847 and 1950. Cambridge Brands at 1810 Main Street is the oldest continuously operating candy manufacturer in Cambridge and the last remaining candy manufacturing plant from the original heyday of candy making. But dozens of other factories disappeared completely, taking with them manufacturing secrets that were never properly documented. The story of America's lost candies is inseparable from the history of immigration. At the industry's peak, there were over 60 candy companies in this part of Cambridge. They employed many immigrants from Italy, the Balkans, the Azores, and Eastern Europe. Each group brought its own sweet traditions, creating unique hybrids that existed for a generation or two before disappearing. Italian immigrants, for example, introduced confectionery techniques that combined candied fruits with nuts in intricate patterns, creating architectural sweets that were both sculptures and treats. Initially, sweets were primarily used by pharmacists to mask the bitter taste of medicines and tonics prescribed by doctors to cure various ailments. In the 18th century, apothecaries prescribed sugar candies for chest ailments or digestive problems. The idea of a spoonful of sugar was quite literal at the time. Unpleasant medicines, often herbal mixtures, were suspended in sugar to make them more palatable. 2. This pharmaceutical connection created an entire category of medicinal candies that disappeared when modern medicine definitively separated treatment from pleasure. There were lozenges de Dover, sweet lozenges infused with opium that were sold freely until the early 20th century. Chlorate lozenges, throat lozenges containing dangerous levels of potassium chlorate. Paregoric drops, children's candies containing a mixture of opium and camphor. These candies represented a time when the line between confectionery and pharmacy was dangerously thin. But there were also purely artistic creations that have been lost. Gibraltars were crystallized candies that required a 3-week manufacturing process, where sugar was repeatedly dissolved and recrystallized until it formed perfect geometric structures. The last known maker of authentic Gibraltars, Samuel Pease of Salem, Massachusetts, died in 1924, and with him died the precise technique. Modern attempts at recreation produce only approximations that lack the structural complexity of the originals. It used to be said that, depending on the day of the week, you would notice different smells wafting through the neighborhood. This contributed to people's sense of place, as well as their sense of economic security, providing many hundreds of jobs. This lost olfactory landscape of Confectioner's Row represents more than nostalgia. It was a form of urban sensory navigation that disappeared with standardized industrialization. This timeline illustrates the development of the American candy industry from the 1800s to the present. Of course, as you will see, many retro candies and their founding companies have come and gone. Still, it's interesting that 65% of American chocolate bars have been around for over 60 years, and giant conglomerates have acquired many original brands. But for every brand that survived through corporate acquisitions, dozens of unique artisanal sweets disappeared completely. Blackjacks were black molasses candies that had a complex flavor derived from molasses intentionally burned until almost charred. The technique, which required precise timing and nerves of steel, died out because it was considered too dangerous for mass production. The last known blackjack master, Theodore Grimm of Baltimore, tried to teach the technique to his sons, but they found the process too risky and abandoned the family business in 1952. In the 1800s, molasses was frequently used as a substitute for sugar, which was expensive and harder to obtain. It played a key role in the manufacture of hard candies, taffy, and sugar-coated sweets. Its strong flavor provided a perfect balance to the more delicate tastes of honey or fruit, giving the candies a depth that modern sweets often lack. The use of molasses helped create a unique flavor profile that is still appreciated in some traditional candies today. 4. Among the most enigmatic commercial candies to disappear was Walnut Hill, manufactured by Candy Masters Inc. of Minneapolis in the 1940s. This candy combined Native American black walnuts with a caramel infused with sassafras, creating a flavor that was simultaneously earthy and ethereal. When sassafras was banned as a food additive due to cancer concerns in the 1960s, Walnut Hill disappeared, and with it a unique flavor that defined a generation. The technique of pulling taffy also held lost secrets. During the 1800s, taffy was often made in small batches, using sugar, molasses, and butter, and was typically pulled by hand to create its characteristic texture. The process of making taffy was both an art and a science, requiring a careful balance of heat and time. But there were variations of this technique that have disappeared completely. The silk taffy, for example, required the candy to be pulled exactly 1,024 times, no more, no less, to achieve a texture that dissolved on the tongue like sugary mist. Hermits represent another culinary mystery. Hermit cookies were extremely popular in New England in the early 20th century, thanks to Fanny Farmer, who included a recipe for the spicy cookie in her cookbooks, including the uber-popular original Fanny Farmer cookbook in 1896. The unassuming hermit cookie has largely disappeared, though it occasionally emerges from seclusion. 5. What makes this disappearance particularly frustrating is that no one can agree on exactly what an original hermit was. The recipes vary so drastically that historians suspect the name referred to an entire category of sweets, not a specific recipe. Sweets like horehound drops or molasses chewies were popular in the 1800s, but have largely disappeared from the market, their flavors and textures relegated to historical footnotes. Although old-fashioned candies like marshmallow, circus peanuts, and spiced jelly beans still exist, we wouldn't be surprised if they don't last much longer. 6. Horehound, a bitter herb in the mint family, was the basis of one of the most popular medicinal candies of the 19th century. Horehound drops were prescribed for everything from coughs to melancholy. The flavor, described by contemporaries as pleasantly medicinal, is so alien to the modern palate that attempts at reintroduction have consistently failed. The last factory dedicated exclusively to horehound candies, the Ye Olde Horehound Candy Company of Vermont, closed in 1967. There were also the lost seasonal sweets. The May wine candy was made only for 2 weeks in May, when the woodruff flowers were in full bloom. The candy captured the ephemeral flavor of these flowers in pale green sugar crystals that were said to have aphrodisiac properties. The tradition, brought by German immigrants, died out during the First World War when anti-German sentiment led many families to abandon their old world traditions. The term penny candy emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as a way to describe small, individually priced candies that could be bought for just 1 cent. This concept became particularly popular in the United States after the Civil War, when greater emphasis was placed on mass production and consumer goods became more affordable. The idea behind penny candy was simple yet revolutionary in the world of snacks, to make sweets accessible and available to the masses, including children. Candy stores and general stores often had large glass jars or wooden barrels filled with various types of candy, and for 1 cent, customers could select a handful. Children could go in with just a few cents and leave with a bag full of candy, ranging from peppermint and licorice sticks to saltwater taffy and caramels to lemon drops and gumdrops. 6. But not all penny candies were created equal. There were complex hierarchies and secret economies in this world. Bankers' pennies were special candies reserved for the children of wealthy families, larger, more elaborate, often imported. Mill pennies were smaller, simpler versions for working-class children. This social stratification through candy represents a forgotten chapter in the history of American inequality. The ethnic sweets that disappeared tell stories of assimilation and loss. Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe brought recipes for tiglach, fried dough balls covered with honey and nuts. Greek immigrants made lukumia, precursors to Turkish delight infused with mastic and rosewater. Chinese immigrants created bingtang hulu, candied fruit on bamboo skewers. All of these disappeared as second and third generations Americanized, preferring Baby Ruths to Old World sweets. The late 1700s and early 1800s were a period of rapid technological progress in the United States. The Industrial Revolution spurred urbanization, and with the significant drop in sugar prices, sweets became more accessible to the working class. This increased demand led to the transition of candy manufacturing from home kitchens to large factories, marking the birth of the American candy industry. 2. This transition was not without losses. Small-scale artisanal production allowed for experimentation and customization that mass production could not accommodate. Custom-made sweets for specific occasions, black mourning sweets for funerals, pearly white christening sweets for baptisms, heart-shaped cut sweets for marriage proposals, all disappeared with standardization. The Great Depression saw the rise and fall of unique survival candies. Depression candy was made from caramelized potato skins with burnt sugar, a treat born of desperation that, surprisingly, developed a devoted following. Hoover honey wasn't honey at all, but a syrup made from beets and artificial flavoring that disappeared as soon as the economy improved. These hard-time candies represent American ingenuity in the face of adversity, but also flavors that no one wanted to preserve once the need passed. World War II created its own candy contingencies. With sugar rationed, manufacturers experimented with substitutes that created unique and unrepeatable flavors. Victory Vanilla used synthetic vanilla derived from coal byproducts. Liberty Licorice substituted real licorice with fenugreek and black molasses. When real sugar returned after the war, these substitutes were happily abandoned, but with them went unique flavors that defined the taste of wartime. Circus peanuts have stood the test of time, and we can safely say they may be the oldest American candy still in production. The banana-flavored, orange-colored, spongy-textured marshmallow treat was created in the 1800s, a period known as the penny candy days, and has been a traditional favorite ever since. The most popular type of mass-produced circus peanuts from the 2010s onward are orange and have an artificial banana flavor. These are often created from ingredients including sugar, corn syrup, gelatin, pectin, soy protein, food coloring, and synthetic flavors. Circus peanuts were one of several candies that were available year-round in the 1940s as a result of the widespread use of cellophane packaging in manufacturing. 7. The advent of cellophane changed everything. Candies that previously could only be sold fresh, straight from candy stores, could now be packaged and shipped nationally. But this innovation also killed the local candy store culture. Ellen, if someone asks me, "What do you do?" and I say, "I work for a candy company," they invariably smile. This automatic smile masks the loss of thousands of small family-run bakeries that couldn't compete with mass distribution. Among the most tragic losses were the ritual sweets of specific holidays. Candlemas candy was made only on February 2nd, using edible beeswax mixed with sugar and spices. Michaelmas marzipan appeared only on September 29th, molded into the shapes of angels and dragons. Lammas lozenges celebrated the harvest on August 1st, with candies infused with grains. These liturgical calendar sweets disappeared as America secularized, taking centuries of tradition with them. Coloring techniques also held lost secrets. Before synthetic dyes, candy makers used natural ingredients that created colors impossible to replicate today. Mexican cochineal carmine produced reds that were simultaneously vibrant and subtle. Saffron created golds that seemed to capture sunlight. Violet petals produced purples that changed hue depending on the viewing angle. When synthetic dyes became available, these natural techniques were abandoned because they were too expensive and laborious. There were also trick candies, elaborate confections designed to deceive and delight. Soap candy looked and smelled exactly like soap, but was edible candy. Coal candy perfectly imitated chunks of coal, complete with edible black powder. Glass candy was so transparent it could be mistaken for real glass. These novelty candies disappeared when safety concerns and litigation made deceptive confections too risky to produce. Campbell's is behind this cake, which first appeared in the 1920s and 30s and then matured in 1940 with a recipe called steamed fruit and nut pudding, featuring steamed pudding with spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and Campbell's condensed tomato soup. 5. This bizarre example of cross-marketing created an entire category of soup sweets that thankfully didn't survive, but represents an era of limitless culinary experimentation. The most profound loss may be that of the social rituals surrounding these lost sweets. Taffy pulls were social events where entire communities gathered to pull taffy, with young couples using the sticky activity as an approved excuse for physical contact. Candy makings were gatherings of women where secret recipes were shared and social alliances formed. Penny candy dates were courtship rituals where a young person demonstrated their intentions by purchasing specific candies that conveyed coded messages. Today, in rare pockets of America, survivors of these lost candies still exist. Your Old Pepper Candy Company in Salem, Massachusetts, nicknamed America's oldest candy company, still uses recipes from the 1800s. Not only are the recipes the same, some of their shop equipment dates back to the 1800s. But these are exceptions that prove the rule. For every survivor, hundreds of unique candies disappeared forever. The ghost of Confectioner's Row still haunts Cambridge. On the right days, when the wind is blowing just right, locals swear they can still smell phantom caramel and chocolate, impossible aromas from long-demolished factories, olfactory memories of a sweeter America that no longer exists. On an October afternoon in 2019, 94-year-old Martha Stillwater closed the doors of the last authentic penny candy shop in New England. With her died not only a business, but the last living link to a candy tradition that dated back to 1823. Among the dusty shelves, glass jars still contained the last examples of candies that haven't been made in decades. Time-hardened horehound drops, Gibraltars that have lost their crystalline shine, molasses blackjacks that have become sugary fossils. This is the story of the twilight of old-fashioned American candy, told through the last witnesses of a sweeter America that has vanished forever. While it's impossible to present a detailed history, this timeline illustrates the development of the American candy industry from the 1800s to the present. Of course, as you'll see, many retro candies and their founding companies have come and gone. Still, it's interesting that 65% of American chocolate bars have been around for over 60 years, and giant conglomerates have acquired many original brands. But for every brand that survived, hundreds of artisanal recipes died with their creators, leaving only enigmatic names in dusty records. The concept of penny candy was more than just cheap sweets. It represented an entire social and economic structure that defined American childhood for over a century. The late 1700s and early 1800s were a period of rapid technological progress in the United States. The Industrial Revolution spurred urbanization, and with the significant drop in sugar prices, sweets became more accessible to the working class. This increased demand led to candy manufacturing transitioning from home kitchens to large factories, marking the birth of the American candy industry. 2. But there were candies that preceded even this initial industrialization. Cream candy, popcorn, peppermint, molasses, rose, clove, nut, butterscotch, sugar plums, lemon drops, lemon candy, peppermint drops, French kisses, cinnamon ice cream, wintergreen, sour drops, horehound, lavender, gum drops, vanilla, rock, birch, cat's eye, orange, cough, kisses. This is not presented as an exhaustive list. These were the candies that children spontaneously named when asked to shout out all sorts. 3. What is striking about this list from the mid-1800s is the complete absence of chocolate, a flavor that now completely dominates the American candy market. Among the most mysterious sweets that disappeared was an entire category of medicinal sweets, representing a time when the line between pharmacy and confectionery was virtually non-existent. Early on, sweets were primarily used by pharmacists to mask the bitter taste of medicines and tonics prescribed by doctors to cure various ailments. In the 18th century, apothecaries prescribed sugar candies for chest ailments or digestive problems. The idea of a spoonful of sugar was quite literal at the time. Unpleasant remedies, often herbal mixtures, were suspended in sugar to make them more palatable. 2. This pharmacological connection created unique sweets that would be unthinkable today. The first recipe even suggests adding ambergris, an expensive commodity that would have been imported from the Nantucket area. Ambergris is created in the intestines of sperm whales and can weigh up to 100 pounds. It is thought that ambergris helps whales digest sharp objects without cutting themselves internally. It was used in colonial times in expensive perfumes and food flavorings. Imagine paying hundreds of dollars today for a candy flavored with whale intestinal secretions. The social rituals surrounding these lost sweets were just as important as the sweets themselves. Many of us who write Western historical fiction have the occasional scene that takes place in a general store or warehouse. I myself frequently have a character buying sweets for themselves or children. But what were these sweets like? I mentioned licorice whips and peppermint sticks in my stories, but what else did they have back then? 5. The answer is a universe of flavors and textures that today seem alien to the modern palate. Sometime in 1847, a gentleman named Oliver Chase invented the wafer-cutting machine, and the famous Necco wafer was born. The first branded chewing gum, made from tree sap, followed the next year. Later, in 1854, Whitman's chocolates joined the multitude of sweets. 5. These milestones represent the beginning of mechanization that would eventually kill off artisanal production. One of the most fascinating aspects of lost sweets was their connection to specific events in American history. Turn back the clock to colonial America, when elections were a national holiday and celebrated with cake while votes were counted, a process that lasted for weeks. Appropriately titled Election Day Cakes, These were alcohol-infused cakes made with yeast, whiskey, and many spices, such as nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon. 6. As the electoral process modernized and accelerated, these monumental cakes disappeared, taking with them a tradition of sugary civic participation. The immigrants who arrived brought their own sweet traditions, creating unique hybrids that existed for only a generation or two. The Pennsylvania Dutch, who were actually German, brought recipes for shoe-fly pie when they settled in Pennsylvania. The British colonists who settled in New England brought recipes for fruit-based fools, slumps, and grunts. And the true Dutch who settled in New York brought a recipe for something called oliekoeks, oily cakes, which later evolved into our modern donuts. 7. But many of these ethnic candies have disappeared completely. Mary Jane peanut butter molasses candies, Charles N. Miller Co. Stark candy, Boston M.A. 1914 Necco wafers. Simultaneously, today only one remains. To take a deep dive into the rich and sweet history of candy, CBS News' Dana Jacobson took a trip to Ye Old Pepper Candy Company in Salem, Massachusetts, dubbed America's oldest candy company. "October is our busiest month of the year," co-owner Bob Birkinshaw told Jacobson. Along with his daughter, Jackie Russell, the pair are third and fourth generation candy makers who still make the same sweet temptations as their company's founder. Not only are the recipes the same, according to Birkinshaw, some of their shop equipment dates back to the 1800s. 9. This company represents a living link to the past, but also a melancholy reminder of how many others have disappeared. They trace the company's founding to an Englishwoman named Mary Spencer, who arrived in the U.S. in 1806 after a shipwreck. She was destitute. She landed in Salem, and her neighbors asked if there was anything they could do for her, and she said, "If you could give me some sugar, I can make sweets, and I can start to support myself," Birkinshaw said. After they donated a barrel of sugar, Birkinshaw said she began making her Gibraltars, believed to be the first commercially sold sweets in the country. 9. Gibraltars represent a particular mystery in the history of lost candies. Although they are still made in Salem, the modern recipe is admittedly different from the original. He decided that the Gibraltar was kind of a feminine candy, Birkinshaw said. It was made in lemon and peppermint flavors. Pepper's answer, according to Birkinshaw, was a more masculine candy made from blackstrap molasses called the Blackjack. 9. This original Blackjack, with its intense, almost burnt flavor, has completely disappeared. Modern versions are pale shadows of the original. The loss of specific production techniques means that even when we have the recipes, we cannot recreate authentic sweets. 20 years ago, c. 1840, it was considered quite clever, with a pair of scissors, the main tool a sugar maker used, to cut 7 pounds of boiled acid drops to size, and with the help of a practiced boy, round them and press them flat by hand in half an hour. The same quantity can now, by machine, be turned into drops by a boy alone in 5 minutes. 3. This mechanization, though efficient, killed the art. The human touch, the sensitivity to subtle changes in temperature, the intuition about when the sugar was just right, the knowledge passed down through generations, all of that was lost. Birkinshaw now passes recipes on to his son-in-law, as his father and grandfather had done before, sharing the culinary secrets behind old-fashioned lemon drops and, of course, Gibraltars, made the same way Mary Spencer did in 1806. "There's definitely an easier way," Birkinshaw laughed. "This isn't a business to be in if you're looking for an easy one." And 9. Among the most poignant losses are the candies that disappeared due to changes in available ingredients. The 1800s saw the rise and fall of slavery with its close connection to sugarcane, the introduction of new sugars promoted by abolitionists, and the massive changes in food due to the Industrial Revolution, including the candy we know today. 1800s confectionery shop in a box. The 1800s were a time of tremendous upheaval, change and transformation, and sugars and candies were part of it. This collection contains some of the most significant from sorghum sugar, widely used throughout the nation, including as a substitute for cane sugar for abolitionists. 10. Sorghum sugar, once common in American candies, has almost completely disappeared from modern confectionery. Its unique flavor, more complex than white sugar, less intense than molasses, created flavor profiles that cannot be reproduced with modern sweeteners. Candies made with beet sugar during wartime had their own unique characteristics that were lost when cane sugar regained dominance. Os próprios nomes dos doces perdidos são poesia. Chase is Brunch, de Chase Candy Co., St. Joseph, M.O., 1940. Chew Away, Candy Masters, Inc., Minneapolis, Maine, 1940. Clark is Butterettes, D.L. Clark, Pittsburgh, PA, 1940. Pecan Pete, Paul F. Bache Candy Co., Bloomington, E.L., 1940. Variety, Candy Masters, Inc., Minneapolis, MN, 1940s. Walnut Hill, Candy Masters, Inc., Minneapolis, MN, 1940s. Each name carried a history, a regional identity, a connection to its creator that was lost when the companies went bankrupt or were absorbed by larger conglomerates. The concept of seasonal sweets has also changed dramatically. Today, most sweets are available year-round, but ancient sweets were closely tied to seasons and harvests. Most colonial desserts were fruit-based, although some were made from sweetened corn or other vegetables like squash. Until sugar became readily available in the latter part of the 18th century, molasses and maple syrup were the most commonly used sweeteners. Colonial recipes reflected not only the ingredients available in any particular region, but also the ethnic origins of the colonists. 7. One of the most tragic chapters in the history of lost sweets is the disappearance of Native American candies. Before colonization, indigenous peoples had their own sweet traditions based on natural sweeteners and unique preservation techniques. Indian pudding is a centuries-old cornmeal molasses pudding first made by American colonists who were likely recreating the hasty pudding they left behind in England. Hasty pudding is made with oats, but since oats were unavailable in America, cornmeal was substituted. Cornmeal, called Indian flour by the colonists, was one of many food gifts from Native Americans, and molasses was widely available to the early rum industry. 11. But there were native sweets that were never properly documented before they disappeared. Crystallization techniques using maple sap, preservation methods using specific plant ashes, combinations of native fruits and nuts that created unique textures and flavors. All this knowledge was lost when native communities were displaced and their traditions disrupted. Although the British called such confections sweetmeats, the Americans came to call them candy, from the Arabic kandi, made of sugar, although candy is found in English as early as the 15th century. Caramels were known in the early 18th century and lollipops by the 1780s. Hard candies, made with lemon or peppermint flavors, were popular in the early 19th century. A significant moment in the history of sweets occurred at the Great Exhibition of 1851 in London, where French-style candies with rich cream centers were exhibited for the first time. 12. This international influence shaped American sweets, but it also led to the abandonment of native recipes in favor of European styles considered more sophisticated. The result was a gradual homogenization that erased unique regional and ethnic differences. Industrialization brought efficiency, but also loss. In 1913, an American company called Standard Candy created the first amalgamated candy bar by adding multiple ingredients to form a single piece of candy. Their Goo Goo Cluster, a southern favorite, combined milk chocolate, caramel, marshmallow, and nuts. The 1920s were a boom time for chocolate bars. World War I soldiers had sampled sweets like Tootsie Rolls in their daily rations and continued to eat sweets when they returned home. Furthermore, during the Depression, candy was seen as a cheap and healthy meal replacement. In the 1920s, Chocolate bars like Baby Ruth, Milky Way, and Mounds became popular favorites. 13. This period of innovation was also a period of destruction. For every new successful dessert, dozens of traditional recipes were abandoned as outdated or unprofitable. Convenience triumphed over complexity, shelf life over flavor, mass production over craftsmanship. Sin. It was my grandmother's favorite and hasn't been made in many, many years. I haven't heard of those, Teresa. What are they? 5. This exchange perfectly captures the problem. Candies that were loved by a generation simply disappear, and within a generation or two, even their names are forgotten. Today, in rare pockets of America, survivors of these lost candies still persist, but they are exceptions that prove the rule. I remember buying squirrels that were penny candy. They were almond-shaped and had a dark caramel coating on them. I haven't seen them in years. For the past 2 years, I haven't been able to find Mary Jane peanut butter kisses for Halloween. I'm not sure what's going on. 5. Each year, another classic dessert quietly disappears from the shelves without fanfare or mourning. Modern attempts to revive old desserts often fail because the context has irreversibly changed. This classic American dessert, sometimes called Apple Brown Betty, is a fruit-scented dessert from the same genetic pool as cobbler and apple crisp, and first appeared in the late 1800s. Typically, apples, pears, or berries are baked, and the fruit is then layered with sweet, buttery crumbs. President Reagan and his wife Nancy were fans of Apple Brown Betty when they lived in the White House. And no, Betty is not Betty Crocker. The origin of the dessert's name is still up in the open. 6. Even when recipes survive, the world in which they were created has disappeared. The wood-fired ovens that gave baked goods a subtly smoky flavor have been replaced by precise electric ovens. The raw milk that gave caramels their complexity has been pasteurized into uniformity. The old fruits, with their intense flavors, have been replaced by modern varieties bred for durability during transport rather than flavor. The social role of sweets has also fundamentally changed. Dessert in colonial times was served as a status symbol in the homes of the wealthy, since sugar and refined flour were expensive and often scarce. Dessert was not an everyday thing, but was considered more of a special occasion or treat or something to serve to company. A notable exception was when foods we consider dessert today were served as main courses. Apple pie, for example, appeared at breakfast, lunch, and dinner in many New England homes. 7. This shift from sweets as special occasions to ubiquitous daily consumption has fundamentally changed our relationship with sweets. What was once precious and rare has become commonplace and disposable. In the process, we have lost not only specific recipes, but an entire culture of appreciation and ritual surrounding sweets. And maintaining the company's history and tradition, he said, is what makes them continue. History is very important. It's where we came from. It's how our company started, he said. 9. But for every year-old pepper candy company that persists, hundreds of others have closed their doors forever, taking with them secrets that were never written down, techniques that were never taught, flavors that will never again dance on human tongues. The archaeology of lost candies continues in attics and basements across America, where old recipe books await discovery, where rusty candy molds hold the forms of forgotten treats, where glass jars still contain the last vestiges of candies that no one alive remembers how to make. Each discovery is both a celebration and a mourning. A celebration that something has been saved, a mourning for all that has been lost. 1800s time. Capsule. The 1800s were a dynamic time for food of all kinds, and candy was no exception. In this time capsule, children will experience these changes from savory and medicinal hard candies to circus peanut, actually made for circuses in the late 1800s. Taffy treasures, saltwater taffy, molasses pulls, and Turkish taffy, handmade, machine-made, stick in your teeth or melt in your mouth. 10. But today's children will never know the social ritual of a taffy pull, where entire communities gathered to pull hot taffy hands, buttered laughter echoing as the sweet treat was stretched and folded hundreds of times until it reached the perfect texture. They will never experience the anticipation of waiting weeks for an election cake while votes were counted. They will never know the pride of mastering a family sweet recipe passed down through generations. In its place, we have efficiency, consistency, and convenience. We have sweets that last for years on shelves, that taste the same in Maine or California, that can be ordered online and delivered in days. We've conquered the world, but we've lost something ineffable in the process. The connection between sweet and place, between flavor and memory, between the act of making and the act of savoring. The lost sweets of ancient America were not merely sugar and flavoring. They were expressions of community identity, markers of social class, remedies and celebrations, gifts of love, and symbols of prosperity. They were made by hands that knew their textures intimately, sold by people who knew their customers by name, and consumed in rituals that gave meaning to everyday life. Today, as the last generation that remembers these sweets ages and dies, we are losing more than recipes. We are losing a way of life, a relationship with food that was simultaneously simpler and more complex than our own. America's lost sweets are sweet ghosts that haunt our collective memory, reminding us that progress always comes at a price, and sometimes that price is measured in flavors we will never taste again. The future may bring attempts to recreate these lost candies, gastronomic archaeological efforts to resurrect dead flavors. But even if we succeed in recreating the physical recipes, we can never recreate the world in which they existed. America's lost candies will forever remain lost, not only in substance but in meaning. Ghost candies of a sweeter nation that now exists only in fragments of memory and dusty jars in forgotten stores. As the sun sets on the last authentic penny candy shop, as the last master confectioner passes on his recipes to hands that will never fully master the art, as the last jar of authentic blackjack slowly turns to dust, we are left with a haunting question. In our quest for the future, what else are we willing to leave behind? And when we finally realize what we've lost, will it be too late to recover even the crumbs?